I'm excited to talk to you today about the Silver Plume Mountain Park. It really is a hybrid project, and I'm going to just jump right in. But before I go, we've got such a lovely visual here, and I've got a pointer. This is the town of Silver Plume. Here's I-70. And so with that in mind, I'm going to jump right in. Okay. So just a real quick something about my organization. I'm with the Colorado Historical Foundation. I'm Director of Preservation Programs there. We were founded in 1965, and one of our biggest programs is the holding of conservation easements on historically designated properties. As you guys are all so used to more land-based conservation, as in, riparian landscapes, open space, recreation. I always think we're a little bit of the black sheep here at the party, but we got very involved several years ago when the certification process came in, and we are the first and only certified historic preservation easement holding organization in the state of Colorado. We have 121 easements on historically designated properties. That's kind of our box around the work that we do locally, state, or federally designated properties. We have 121. One of them you all had a beer in last night, the good old Gunnison Arts Building. Yeah. So they range from all kinds of different projects, but today we're talking about this baby. And this is a new one, and this is a very exciting project. Along I-70, right above the town of Silver Plume, is a large cultural landscape. And that in 2024, I'm going to show you a few other pictures just to really get our bearings around this beautiful, beautiful cultural landscape. Here is I-70 again. You're all with me. And right up above here is this very, very steep, largely inaccessible landscape. And it tells the story of mining in Silver Plume. So this is a very early, historically designated area, the Silver Plume Georgetown National Historic Landmark District, perhaps one of the first in the country. In the 60s, which was about the time the Historic Preservation Act went through Congress, people started bringing projects forth. And this one, I've got a boundary over here showing how big it is, which is really unique because today, people only want to do like the little bit of town and the little buildings. But the people who put this National Register Landmark District together had the forethought to think, without this, defining this, we really just have a grouping of buildings. I don't think they'd ever get away with it legally today. Nobody wants to give up those kind of property rights. Although, let me just say, I have to say this, landmark designation at the federal and the state level does not come with restrictions to the owner. It's perhaps the biggest myth I put out there. The land use restrictions come with generally local designation, and that's where the teeth are. Property owners can tear down their buildings. People will get all nervous. Oh, we're on the National Register. That doesn't mean, it's more of feathering your cap. It's a record of the historical context of that property. So I want to just really pause on my favorite definition of a cultural landscape from the Cultural Landscape Foundation. They provide a sense of place and identity, map our relationship with the land over time, and are part of our national heritage and each of our lives. So there's a lot of value up in this particular landscape, and I just can't get enough of looking at this landscape. And here's that little town, rough and tumble mining town of Silver Plume. Within this landscape are a myriad, about 95 identified historical cultural resources, from these beautiful dry stacked walls by Welsh and Italian masons to derricks and boilers, right down to these shacks. And we've got lots of corrugated metal and little rickety shacks, none of which were built, you know, for endurance. They were there. I mean, that's part of the story up there. These are temporary structures. So in 2023, pretty recently, 95 individual mining claims came up for sale. What I learned at that time was that each mining claim in Clear Creek County also comes with the right to build a little shack on it, which means there could have been just, a myriad of wonderful development potentials right up above Silver Plume. So I received a call from a long-term colleague up there, Cindy Neely, and I suspect many of you know Cindy, very active in Clear Creek County, that the town was going to buy a mountain. And she went before the town council and said, does anybody here want to buy a mountain? And this very colorful group essentially said, oh, hells yes. So the price was $2,500 an acre, and the town got together, first of all, and got very panicky about what might happen. They did not want zip lines. They did not want tiny houses all above their little cultural landscape. So much would have been lost. And boy, howdy, did they step up. And they started this grassroots fundraising campaign. And they have this little mountain over here on the right. And they did a parade. And they raised about half of the purchase price. And then they went out talking to the Gates Family Foundation and the State Historical Fund and GOCO. And they raised the funds to match several grants. And what came out of this was this concept of how to protect it. They didn't know really what to do with it. And Cindy Neely approached me and said, you know, what's really so important about this, besides that we want to restrict development, naturally, what's so important about this is the cultural landscape and the history of that 1880s mining landscape, which was so defining for Colorado, right? I mean, industrial definition, transportation, all of these significance around virtually why our state was settled as it was, mining. So this is important to note that this was not a tax credit project. The easement was a required deliverable of a state historical fund grant. They gave them an acquisition grant for the land, and with that is the requirement to put an easement on it. So lucky for Silver Plume, they didn't have to go through all those hoops. So here we are. I think I look a little too conspiratorial with the mayor here. But you know, what are the conservation values here? First and foremost, it's a National Register Landmark District, and the cultural landscape is key. It's an open space. It also happens to be a huge bighorn sheep migration and breeding area. Recreation, there's a trail that goes through that used to be an old mining road. It's called the 730 Mine Road. And then it's, again, a huge view shed along the I-70 corridor. Millions and millions of people go up and down that. I know every one of you has driven by this so many times. I hope you'll look at it differently next time you go by. So in addition to the funding that came with the acquisition, they also had the forethought, the people who put this project together, to put in a plan, an implementation, long-term plan. And I just put this up there to show you guys all of the different things that went into it, from, you know, defining the topography and the slope analysis, and again, highly inaccessible, to the potential development insofar as recreation and access, interpretation of the historic resources, and to give the town of Silver Plume, which I think, you know, is about 212 residents, to give them an idea of what we're dealing with here. And it was really important to us, looking at this plan, to not strap them with expectations. You know, I think an easement the stewardship piece is so important, and we have all of these goals and values laid out for what we want to do, and certainly the overarching is no development. But we took all of these historic resources, and all these circles represent stabilization and preservation sites. And it was super important that we were realistic about, hey, Silver Plume, we're talking perpetuity here. Let's not leave you with something you can never achieve, which is to keep these mining derricks. I mean, thank God for the Department of Reclamation and Mining Safety on this one, as well as the guy who did all our title searches on those mining claims. So we divided them into 3 categories: interpretive sites, stewardship sites, and ruins. And again, most of these little buildings were shacks. And each one of the interpretive signs, they're the lower turquoise pieces right there along the highway. And stewardship sites are just a little bit higher, and those two, they're kind of clustered because they're really important mines. Like, these were some of the highest delivering silver mines in the state of Colorado. So these are some of the sites that had interpretive potential, and we defined what that looked like. What did the signage look like? What did the liability signage look like? What kind of trail access might they have? And wonderful mining derricks and adits. But I threw that in for you conservation people because there's how inaccessible it is if you look up here at the steepness of the site. And there's my dog. And here we are running around this is a ruin. We're treating them as such, but they have different levels. The interpretive sites, they have to keep them accessible. They have to keep the building standings and the derrick standings. And then they go in a hierarchy to stewardship sites. Maintenance is encouraged, but not required. And we can't straddle their, I think, 0.5 employees in the town with keeping these things standing. We know they're ruins and we know they were temporary, but it's the cultural landscape and it's kind of the forest for the trees here. Here's another great picture. We have a wonderful drone that runs all the way across us, but it's just too much bandwidth. We've received some really great recognition on this project. We had a feature article in the National Trust Preservation magazine. We were awarded last week a Preservation Edge for kind of this hybrid. And why do we call it a hybrid project? And I say mostly because I don't think funders knew what to do with us. It was bringing the cultural resources and the land conservation values and the natural resources all together. And GOCO kind of didn't know what to do with us. They sort of shrugged. But I'm really proud that we brought this across the finish line with all these really great kudos too. And I want to say I'm here to talk about cultural resources and what's going on in your property and not being precious about these buildings. And I hope you'll hunt me down and talk to me about what's on your properties. So thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Cindy. That was really interesting. And your pace was very nice. My caffeine to calorie ratio is way off as well, so bear with me. So I'm Alyssa Bentele. I'm a land steward with Colorado West Land Trust, and I have been working on our water protection strategy plan for the last few years now, and excited to share it all with you. All right, so our water strategy process had 3 main components: the water plan itself, relationship building, and our water rights database. And I'll tell you a little bit about each of them. We underwent this process with a team that was robust and powerful. We had our wonderful staff and board. I do want to call out that our board was immensely helpful. We have, I think, a uniquely working and expert board, and they brought a lot of expertise to the table. We had water attorneys, ag economists, and water field experts on the team. We worked with the Freshwater Trust, who was just a data analysis powerhouse, back office thinking for our locate work. We hired a legal intern and a water rights data technician. And we also worked with some local water engineers on this process. And then I also wanted to call out some of our funders who made this project happen. All right, so why undertake this work? So Colorado West Land Trust is the result of emerging over the years between different land trusts. A few years ago, about 5 years ago now, Black Canyon Regional Land Trust and Mesa Land Conservancy merged, which then resulted in a portfolio of over 600 conservation easements. With over 45 years of doing this work and evolution along that time and how we write conservation easements, and a very diverse landscape, we have a diverse array of conservation easements that approach water rights very differently. The language that encumbers them has changed and shifted over the years. And we really wanted to get a landscape level view of the portfolio we had, but also strategize moving forward how to more strategically approach water rights and water conservation, and ensuring that really critical ag water rights remain in ag production. Conserved properties change hands, of course, and when that happens, there's a loss of institutional landowner knowledge when it comes to their water and how it's operated. The more we know our portfolio, the better we can steward our easements. And of course, with climate crisis, increased drought, and unpredictability, there's a need to be able to pivot and respond quickly. In a year like this one, where the snowpack was less than stellar, and we want to be able to help serve our producers more effectively. We also are undergoing a conservation and stewardship planning process, and those are created in alignment with this water plan. I did want to note that this postcard here, it does feel like we're kind of jumping into the deep end a little bit. And this is actually in Hotchkiss, where I live. The Hotchkiss Fairgrounds now, they have this high diver. Alan and Marie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think today we might call this a liability. One of the first parts of this process was an in-depth geospatial analysis that the Freshwater Trust really helped us with. And the three major components were diversion structures, assessing for water security, and help visualize the diversions within our service area. Production, so mapping out the crops and the soil. And then habitat, riparian, watershed, terrestrial, and conservation network data. Here is an example of a riparian ecological resiliency map. So just getting a good sense of some of the areas where there is solid resiliency in the green, and then we'll call them areas of opportunity in the red. So like I said, our portfolio is very diverse. Our landscape is diverse. The next two maps, I think, highlight that really effectively. This one is the diversion extents in the Grand Valley, full of federal projects, very simple. Of course, they all have their intricacies and they all operate differently, but there's only 7 of them. Compare that to where I live in the North Fork and Surface Creek valleys, and you have a huge array of diversion structures, a lot of mom and pop laterals, and then some larger systems down here. Where's my pointer? This is the Uncompahgre Valley. That's kind of a more simple, extensive system, but it's really complicated up here. And so, in the merging process, this was formerly a Black Canyon landscape, we really wanted to get a good sense of how these systems worked and how they impact our existing conservation easements and projects moving forward. In the process, we came with 5 main goals, and I do want to read these because we worked really hard on them. The first goal is accelerate land and water protection activities in high-value, water-secure production areas. So those are areas where the water rights are senior, are solid, the water is available year to year. How can we protect those rights and keep them in ag production? 2, implement strategies to make important production areas that are less water secure more resilient, and protect Quilt's deeded water interests. So this is just really focusing on areas where the water security is not so good. How can we help build resiliency for those producers? Engage in forest health and floodplain restoration projects to improve ecological function increase water supply, and safeguard irrigated areas. Preserve and enhance natural habitats, wetland, riparian, and wet meadow, while engaging in irrigated land protection. So this is not just about irrigated ag lands, but also the wetland, the wet mountain, the high mountain landscapes, and the critters that live there. And build capacity to partner with basin stakeholders. Now, I won't make you read all of these, but I do want to note that we were really intentional in crafting these goals. These goals, which of course have plenty of sub-goals, were developed to really fit our organization and where we'd like to go. However, they also have the added benefit of very closely aligning with the goals of the Colorado Water Plan and the basin implementation plans in which we operate, which is the Colorado and the Gunnison River basins. So each of these goals directly tie to a goal outlined in each of those plans. We just want to ensure that the work we're doing not only serves our landscapes, our landowners, and our communities, but also is in alignment with efforts going on at different scales so that we can help leverage each other's work. Some of the implementation tools that we dreamt up in this process are, of course, conservation easements. Conservation easements have been used to encumber water rights language since the beginning. But we really took some time to assess the encumbrance language that we use and think really strategically about each property and, do we want to allow for flexibility in water leasing? Whereas, are there places where we really want to lock it down and not allow for any transfer? Land and water acquisition. So this is sort of new land protection projects. Purchase, innovate, protect, sell. Thanks, Rob, for that. PIPS, if you will. This is sort of our spin on buy, protect, sell, because in between the protect and sell, we thought, where can we innovate? Where can we implement some water savings to just improve the quality of those projects? Restoration and resiliency, shout out to David Varner, who does all that work for us. But of course, restoration and resiliency is fully dependent on watershed health and water availability. So really strategically thinking about forest health, fire, floodplain, and retention. And then monitor and adapt. Evaluating strategies and outcomes. We don't want this to be a plan that sits on a shelf and gets dusty. We want to make sure that we are consistently looking into it, and then when we do implement these plans, just keeping tabs and monitoring them effectively. So relationships are really key, of course, to any collaborative process. I wanted to start with history because I think knowing the history of the lands and the water and the people that we're working with is the first step to ensuring that you have a really viable project and a good relationship when we're talking about in perpetuity. I included a couple of pictures here. The one on the top is a fellow fetching water from the Crawford Clipper Ditch. This was around 1910, and they didn't have a town-wide water system until 1926, so you really had to work for it. And then below is the Crawford Clipper Ditch, which we did a conservation easement on. And this is some ditch infrastructure and riparian habitat. And so just knowing a little bit of the legacy of that ditch, of course, also, I don't have a picture here of what that landscape looked like pre-ditch. And, the beaver, the fish, and the human have been stewarding these watersheds long before we came along. And then ditch companies, like I said, there's a huge amount of them in my neck of the woods. And so ensuring that we have relationships with these ditch companies so that when a property goes up for sale and a landowner wants to sell their water rights, a ditch company might think to look to see if those water rights are encumbered with a conservation easement. And then more broadly, roundtables, the Colorado River District, CWCB, water commissioners, and funders. All of these relationships are really key to ensuring that any work we do has lasting power. A little bit of nitty-gritty here. The database and inventory work was something I worked closely on. And And this was, like I said, over 600 conservation easements. We could look in any one conservation easement and get a sense of how those water rights were encumbered. But on a landscape level, we didn't really have a good sense of it. And so what we needed to do was inventory all of those easements and create a database to hold that inventory. So we worked with back office thinking on that to develop a waterways extension within Locate. This was done in tandem with creating a typology and the inventory work itself. So figuring out what are some of the moving parts that might exist in any conservation easement, and how can we look at an easement and categorize them based on those moving parts, aka can the water be leased or not. CDSS, Colorado Decision Support System, is the statewide database for all things water rights, and we integrated that database directly into ours within Locate. So all of our data within Locate is directly pulled from CDSS, and then we launched the Locate application and then linked the data to it. Here is just like a quick overview of some of the typology of some of the fields that we were looking for in conducting our inventory. This is an example of the landing page for a property that is not real within the waterways extension. And so in here we're able to have like a narrative description of the water rights, how the water rights are encumbered, and then some general fields like, does the conservation easement allow for a subdivision? And if so, are the water rights addressed? Are there any discrepancies? Wanted to call that out because there are often discrepancies that require follow-up. And then you can tie the actual water right itself to the conservation easement. So this is a water right pulled directly from the CDSS system that I can then link directly to the conservation easement. And here is a page where we can see all of the links associated with the conservation easement. So we can track direct water rights like this Coal Creek ditch, and then shares within ditch companies and reservoirs. Some challenges that came about in this process are that human systems are messy. Conservation easements can be messy, water rights can be a hot mess. And a lot of this is just based on word of mouth historically. So we, figured out 40 years ago which water rights were associated with the easement by asking the farmer. But it turns out if something has been called, Coal Creek historically, but the state system has it as Coral Creek, it's a completely different water right. And so making sure that any little typo will take you in a different direction. So cleaning up some of those messy systems was challenging, but proving fruitful. And then, like I said, data discrepancy resolution, both in CDSS, using CDSS to verify and then conducting landowner outreach to just ask what they know about their water rights has been helpful. And then capacity needs, training staff and consultants on how to use the system, how water rights operate, what conservation easements are. And then the database itself requires tutorials, backups, and fluency in Locate, which, if any of you use Locate, can be a little challenging. Moving forward, some things we have in mind are one, drought quick response. This is a big reason we undertook this project. We had a landowner who grows peaches in the North Fork, and it was a dry year, and he needed late season water for his peach trees. He wanted to know, are there any water rights? Are there any hay fields nearby that can lease some of their water to me? We didn't have a quick way to look at our portfolio and get a good sense of what water rights might be available. Now we do. We can pretty quickly pull a report from Locate and know where there is flexibility within a diversion system. The abandonment list, we're going to be a lot more nimble when that time comes around. Stewardship question response. We often have landowners ask about their water, new landowners especially. And so by us getting more educated in how the water rights work and how they're associated with the conservation easement, we're better able to serve those questions. And then new conservation easement project protocols. So developing a better system than we had 20 years ago for ensuring that the water research due diligence we do for every new easement is top-notch. Communications was really important at the end of this project. Thank you to Julia Courier, our marketing and communications manager, for doing a stellar job of getting the word out. The water protection plan itself is a 90-page tome, which most people don't want to read, though I do recommend. It's really well done. And so Julia summarized it so beautifully and packaged it in our nice branding in a 4-page document that people do want to read. And so it's been a nice way for us to share this work with other folks. The water security analysis, we have a good amount of that which we kept private, which I just want to highlight because it's really important as we all consider our water work. This is super sensitive information, and we don't want to put a target on really high-value water rights. We also don't want to call out diversions that are less than secure. And then we also did a round of press releases and then ensured that our staff and board had talking points so we know how to talk about this plan. Oops. Building capacity moving forward, we're continuing with staff and board education, continuing to foster stakeholder partnerships, finish the waterways extension because all of those discrepancies need further research, fostering ditch company relationships, of course, always private and public funding. We're trying to get more funding to make sure that the actual projects that come from this plan can get done on the ground. And then increasing the pace and scale. And I just want to note that this is the importance of the Colorado conservation community. We are working within our own little landscapes to implement these projects and ensure water security and ag viability moving forward. But water isn't stuck to the bounds of a map sometimes, and it's a whole system and a whole network. And if we're all collaborating on this, I think we'll all be more effective. And here's a picture of some wet meadow restoration work done on Glade Park. Some takeaway tidbits. One, the planning process took place in a crisis pause. And that has felt really helpful because while a crisis of a really dry year sparked the necessity of this project, we did have a couple good years there where we had the time to take our time and ensure that we built this plan and the inventory strategically. But the point is to be nimble amid drought. And so now in a year like this, I think we can be more responsive quickly. Like I said, we're able to answer landowner questions about water rights more effectively. Our work leverages each other. So continuing to learn from the KIC community to continue building collective momentum. I really love chatting about this work with other folks here, so I encourage us all to continue that conversation. And then, of course, the viability of Colorado's agricultural future and our future in general is completely dependent on water and our water landscapes. So it has been an immense amount of work, time, and money to get this project going, but nothing could have been more worth it. So highly recommend everybody else do the same. That is all. Thank you.
This is a project 47 years in the making. In this image, you can just, out of sight is the town of Crested, Butte. Gives you an idea of the proximity of this mountain to the community that I live in or live near and have been a part of for many years. Hard rock mining began here on this mountain in the 1880s in what is called, we can still call it the Keystone Mine, and mining continued through the 1970s. The mountain has been owned by mining companies continually through all those years, including today. Coal Creek, which is the drainage right behind this beautiful old snag, sits right at the base of the mountain, and it's also the source of Crested Butte's domestic drinking water. Just below the mountain is the confluence with the Slate River. The Slate River flows into the East River. The East River with the Taylor River form the Gunnison River. The confluence of the Gunnison River, where it starts, is about 8 miles from where we are now. The Gunnison River is the second largest tributary in the Colorado River system. Who knows what the largest tributary is in the Colorado River system, aside from the Colorado main stem itself? Rob says it's the Green River. Does everybody agree? The Green River and the Gunnison River and the Colorado River support 40 million Americans downstream. And that's something in headwaters communities that we take very seriously. So protecting Mount Emmons isn't just protecting the view from Crested Butte, it's also protecting our watershed, our wildlife, our way of life, including water for agriculture right here in the Gunnison Valley. I need to familiarize myself with the technology. This is a story about mining. Okay. It's a story about mining. Folks came to the Gunnison Valley and throughout the Colorado Rockies looking for silver and gold. In the Gunnison Valley, they weren't very successful in that pursuit. We have a lot of mines that opened and failed, small communities that boomed and busted, and really over time it became coal that kept us in business. This is the big mine right in downtown Crested Butte. If you've been to Crested Butte recently or familiar with the town, this is where our community Nordic Center is, our ice rink. We call it Big Mine Park. So that's where that name comes from, and we really honor that history. Big Mine was a coal mine. It was the primary employer for the town of Crested Butte. And you can see train tracks here. You can see those structures, coke ovens. There's some amazing examples of coke ovens today in Redstone and perhaps some other places in the state of Colorado where you can see where they took the, I might butcher this a little bit, so raise your hand if I get it wrong, bituminous coal. And so that was the lower quality coal, got cooked in these coke ovens and then loaded onto train cars, Denver Rio Grande Railroad, that went to, anybody know where this coal went? Pueblo, thank you. And for what purpose? Steel, thank you. Got a really smart bunch here. This was the lifeblood of our community for decades until the train tracks got pulled up and the coal mines closed in the 1950s. It's a colorized photo, but it is incredibly relevant. That is the landscape that's now subdivisions, luxury homes, ski resort, in a very high pressure real estate environment that is the Upper Gunnison Valley. We're also very proud of this railroad heritage that we have here in Gunnison. The Pioneer Museum, just east of town, has a lot of evidence of that railroad history as well. I really encourage folks to see the Pioneer Museum. The depot, that might be a project, I'm not sure if Colorado Historic Society, I imagine they did. The train depot still exists today in Crested Butte. It has all this beautiful architecture that you can see in this photo. Train tracks left in the 70s. A couple small mines remained in the valley, and one of them was the Keystone Mine. And in 1977, Don will recognize this work. In 1977, the AMAX Corporation discovered a massive deposit of molybdenum. Moly, steel hardening agent, it's in everything that we use. Moly mines you will recognize here in Colorado, such as the Climax mine on Fremont Pass, the Henderson mine, there on the way to Winter Park. It's a fairly intensive way of mining a mountain to get moly out of the ground. So in 1977, this community that had become a resort community, the days of mining really had passed, and folks were investing in real estate. They were investing in the resort economy. and Crested Butte became a real different place than the place that was a ghost town in the 1950s. This map shows what was left over from the Keystone Mine based on what is on the ground here today. And so folks have come and gone, various companies have owned and divested of this asset for many years until in 2016, Freeport-McMoRan, doing business as the Mount Emmons Mining Company. Mount Emmons Mining Company was the name of the mining company for decades. They acquired Phelps Dodge, another very large mining company, and as a result, ended up with this asset. So Freeport didn't necessarily pursue this asset for mining, but it was something that they inherited, acquired, purchased, and needed to figure out what to do with it. Meanwhile, the town of Crested Butte had spent the decades growing as a resort community, growing. You can see an art center and you can see an ice rink and a business district and residential and parks. None of these things were there in the 1950s. When I moved to Crested Butte in 1993, there was no high school. This community has grown rapidly and very quickly around an economy that did not involve mining. You can see Mount Emmons right above town. So that prominent mountain in the background is Mount Emmons. That's all private land. So that's obviously a very important part of this story, is what do you do when you have private land right over a town, right over a watershed, right over where people get their domestic water, in an economy, in a community that would really struggle to support a large open mine, such as the one that was proposed. So fortunate for us, we got to work with a willing landowner. And so in our line of work, that's where we start. Do we have a willing landowner? Are they interested in conserving their property? In this case, that solved the puzzle. And so as a community, we like to think, and we did, provide hardy resistance for 47 years, starting in 1977 all the way to 2024. This was not something that the modern version of the Crested Butte community wanted to see in their viewshed, in their watershed, and as a part of their economy. A lot of people worked really hard for a long time. And while the Crested Butte Land Trust gets to tell this story, the conservation story, we certainly weren't the only ones that worked on this for a long time. The mining company needed to get out of certain obligations here, in that they didn't want to mine the mountain. And so that was, number one, the key that unlocked this puzzle. The second thing is that they have a perpetual responsibility to treat acid mine drainage coming out of the mountain, which will likely be coming out of that mountain forever. They also have an aging wastewater treatment plant up there, which is 20 or more years past its usable life. There's tailing ponds, other structures, and other hazards to the watershed that are coming out of the old Keystone Mine. All the bad stuff, most of the bad stuff, was on public land. And all the patented minerals were on private land. And so a part of the solution was that the mine company wanted to acquire the federal land at the base of the mountain and in exchange trade with the public, the U.S. Forest Service, great property both within the Grand Mesa, Uncompahgre, Gunnison National Forest and the Rio Grande National Forest. So in order for this conservation easement to occur, there needed to be a federal land exchange. If you've ever worked in that arena, it takes time. It's complex, and you need a partner. Of course, the U.S. Forest Service was that partner, but this took about 3 years from start to finish. Early in the process, the Crested Butte Land Trust was approached by the land exchange broker partner, Western Lands Group, some of you have probably worked with, to be the holder of this conservation easement. We were honored to be asked, and we had a hearty discussion about whether or not this was something that we thought we could take on. We do believe that it is something we can take on. We accepted that responsibility and are now the holder of a conservation easement on 885 acres of private land on Mount Emmons from the summit to the valley, and including all lands that were exchanged and became private. There's a regulatory framework around this project, of course, as well. Clean Water Act as enforced by CDPHE, Gunnison County and their land use code, as well as the town of Crested, Butte and their water protection ordinances. And then very importantly, we had local environmental organizations that have been keeping an eye on this for literally 47 years, High Country Conservation Advocates, and more recently Cold Creek Watershed Coalition have been making sure that they're looking out for the best interest of both the environment and the community. If you look really closely in this photo, you can see ski tracks on that mountain, and I'll talk about that here in a couple minutes as well. So the conservation outcomes are robust. The public gained 626 acres of new public lands through the exchange, and 885 acres of now private land are conserved. We came up with, collectively, came up with a somewhat novel tool in addition to a conservation easement, and that was a mineral extinguishment agreement. And so folks in the room may know that if you own subsurface mineral rights, that just can't be extinguished. Those stay with the surface, or they stay with that owner in the state of Colorado. So we wanted to sort of build a belt and suspenders approach here to use the conservation easement tool, which I'm really proud to announce that a lot of smart people looked really hard at what the best, most restrictive, and legally defensible tool would be to protect this mountain from current and future threats, and the conservation easement was that tool. And I really believe we had a lot of very bright people looking really hard to make sure that we were using the right deed restriction to protect Mount Emmons. The tool we're using is a good tool. The mineral extinguishment agreement also made the mine company agree to also not develop the minerals in the subsurface. So we have restrictions on mining and mineral development typically in conservation easements, and this just went one level deeper to not just, they can't give up their minerals, but they could give up their right to develop those minerals through this MEA, we called it. Another important component here is that we developed a management plan. We knew that public access was going to be a public benefit of this project, and so we wanted to make sure that the easement holder, the Crested Butte Land Trust, and the landowner, Freeport-McMoran or the Mount Emmons Mining Company, understood that this was an important asset for the community, especially in the wintertime. Up the sort of left skyline there, kind of the West Ridge, there's a skin track, if we're familiar with backcountry skiing terminology. We, the community, myself included, have been serial trespassers on that mountain for decades. This easement, this whole project, land exchange and easement, closed on the 29th of August, and we can legally access Mount Emmons for the first time ever, which I think the community appreciates. They don't often sort of knock on the door to say thanks, but I think that they appreciate being able to access the mountain. And we also consider it a working landscape. From this standpoint, it's different than growing peaches or cattle. This landscape needs to be cleaned, managed, and monitored forever. And so the water treatment plant needs to be replaced. The mine tailings need to be continued to be remediated. Clean water needs to be diverted away from cracks and fissures to prevent it from going underground and coming out as acid mine drainage that needs to be treated before it enters our watershed. So we do consider this a working landscape, just a little different than we refer to other working landscapes in our work. One of the big products of this was, as I mentioned, the management plan. This is a near final draft of the trailhead sign. And so for the first time ever, a backcountry traveler gets to the trailhead, can look at the sign, get information about the project, information about where they can and cannot go, and then get information about safety, including avalanche hazards. Many of you will recognize the language here at the bottom being the, I know you can't read it. This is the revised Colorado Rec Use Statute language. So those of you that deal in fee lands with public access are familiar with this language. And another really important innovation here is that we all determined it would be best to conserve the entire footprint, not leave, let's say, the water treatment plant and some of these other areas outside of the conserved area. So we developed 2 zones. That zone 2 is really the working zone, and zone 1 is where we want the public to be allowed to go. Zone 2, no access. Zone 1, limited public access. And importantly, there are no actual trails up here. And so when we travel over snow on skis, those trails get created. They live in our mind. In the spring, those trails melt and disappear, and the land's returned to nature, to wildlife, to our beautiful scenic view corridors. Make sure I'm on track here. This is a party that was 47 years in the making. On October 4th, the Crested Butte Land Trust, High Country Conservation Advocates, Town of Crested Butte, Gunnison County, all the partners that we brought into this project, I'm saying we, it's a collective we, had a big old street party to celebrate. We had a local band play on a beautiful fall evening with, the foliage, everything just perfect. And it was a real, look at how much fun people are having here. For some that had been around since the 70s, this was like the most satisfying exhale they could imagine after really mashing their teeth and their fists for decades, trying to prevent this mine from being developed in our community and in our watershed. For the Crested Butte Land Trust, it was a real galvanizing moment for our organization to really look at ourselves, look at our board, look at our staff, look at our community, and support to say that we were an organization that was worthy of this challenge. And I hope that over time, more people learn about this project. You will not have read anything, really, in any publications other than the Crested Butte News that gives an accurate story here. And I'm not sure why. This is a big deal. It required collaboration with one of the largest mining companies in the world and a tiny little community that said no or hell no for a long, long time. And something that's been so important to me through this project and until I'm done talking about it is that we would not have accomplished this without a willing landowner. We didn't beat the mine company. They came with a need, and that was operational efficiency. And we again, collectively, were able to help them meet that need as well as have an unbelievable accomplishment for conservation in the state. And it didn't cost any of us any money. In this case, the landowner paid for this project. And so our grant makers could save their powder for other things. And that's something we're also very proud of. Finally, these were all the main partners, and there were others, but these were the main partners, and I really want to make sure that folks see and understand who was at the table for this work. And I'm so proud of the professionals in our conservation community that worked on this project. Alan and Marie, Jessica J., Don Reeder, Jim, do I have him here? Jim Armstrong, also with Rare Earth Science, and Tom Glass from Western Lands Group. We spent years around a physical and virtual table to figure this out, and the benefits are tremendous for the Gunnison Valley community, the state of Colorado, and the United States. And then, of course, I want to credit our great media and photos over here as well. Thank you.